Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We apologize for the bit of a delayed start with technology. Sometimes there's always issues that come up. Today, we're having a panel discussion, a joint discussion between ISAS and NICE. The title of our discussion is The Political Economy of Neighboring Countries' Investments in Nepal. Joining us today, we have four guest speakers. We have Dr. Pushpa Sharma, a visiting senior research fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. We have Professor Nisha Taneja, who's professor and lead of trade, investment, and external relations at the Indian Council for Research on International Economic Relations. We have Dr. Gyo Bingyun, associate professor at the School of International Relations at the Sichuan International Studies University, China, and Dr. Pramod Jaswal, who is research director at the Nepal Institute for International Cooperation and Engagement, Kathmandu, Nepal. During the session will be Dr. Amit Ranjan, research fellow at the Institute of South Asian Studies at the National University of Singapore. This event will also be live streamed on Facebook. I will hand it over to Dr. Amit to begin the session. Thank you.
Thanks, Saad, and sorry for delay. It's all connectivity world and technical world, so we may get to some issues, but now the problem has been solved, so we are sorry for the delay. Thanks, Saad, for introducing the panelist. Before I invite Professor Nisha, I want to make a brief comments on the theme lying between two unfriendly countries, quote unquote unfriendly, India and China. Nepal is often popularly called the, within quote, yam between two rocks. While Nepal has repeatedly said it maintains an independent foreign policies and tries to balance ties with India and China, New Delhi and Beijing compete to get a relatively more favorable dealings and treatment by Kathmandu. Even the USA desires a close strategic engagement with Nepal due to escalating tensions with China in Asia and the Indo-Pacific region. In the last few years, important US officials have regularly visited Nepal. The last one was the US Deputy Secretary of State, Richard Verma, in August 2024. For many in Nepal and outside, the US-sponsored MCC Nepal Compact deal is primarily considered a counterweight to the China-backed BRI. This panel discussion on Nepal's political economy will give a glimpse into the ongoing geostrategic competition and Nepal's way of managing and navigating multiple contests and challenges. With this brief remarks, I would like to welcome Professor Nisha to make her presentation. We'll follow the same order in which the program is scheduled. Professor Nisha.
Thank you, Amit. It's a pleasure to be here with all of you, and thank you, ISAS and NICE, for organizing this webinar. It's a very timely webinar, and what's interesting is that the focus is exclusively on FDI, which is very rare. Other themes kind of hog the limelight, and so I was very happy that this theme was focusing exclusively on FDI. And we all know the advantages of FDI to an economy. I mean, it does enhance economic growth. It promotes domestic production, contributes to exports. There is also the technology transfer and innovation element. It also helps in skill and knowledge transfer. It generates employment. It contributes to the diversification of the industrial base. And one can go on and on. But most important in today's context is that it also contributes to political and social stability, because it is it's in the interest of the host country to manage it so that and the home country, that there is stability, so that there is a continuous flow of FDI. And you very rightly said it's the two, even though Nepal attracts investment from a number of countries, the two largest partners are really India and China, and Nepal is I would say, happily sandwiched between these two large nations. Um, and so India still, I think, accounts for more of the FDI, accounting for 35%, and China accounts for 12%. Sectorally, India has invested more in manufacturing, but China has uh, China has invested more in electricity and hydropower. But overall, if we just look at the hydropower sector, we find that so far India has actually invested in an installed capacity of 2,175 megawatts, whereas China has invested in a capacity of 2,150 megawatts. So India is still a little bit higher than China, and probably because India has had a long history of investing in the hydropower sector. Now, this is one sector that can transform the economic relations between the two countries. Here I'm talking about India and Nepal. This has happened between India and Bhutan. For several years now, India has had a trade deficit with Bhutan because it imports hydropower. So that's the kind of potential that this sector has in terms of strengthening the economic relations between the two countries. Now, India and Nepal haven't really had a good track record in the hydropower sector, but I think both countries have learned from their mistakes in the past. And I think Arun 3 is a good example where it still is the largest hydropower project, and it has a capacity of 900 megawatts, which is built really with Indian FDI. Now, the reason why I'm highlighting Arun 3 is that it has three key features. The first one is that this year, India and Nepal signed agreements for the purchase of 10,000 megawatts of hydropower over the next 10 years. So I think this is really a landmark agreement. Secondly, the project is going to be operated by India for 30 years. And after that, the ownership will be transferred to Nepal. So that's also part of the project agreement. And thirdly, this project is a joint venture between the Indian government, the Nepalese government, and the government of Himachal Pradesh. Now, these features really draw up a new template for India-Nepal cooperation in the hydropower projects, and this lays down a very strong foundation for trust between the two countries. Let's look at Indian FDI in Nepal more minutely. So if you look at the stock of FDI, then manufacturing accounted for 38% and electricity accounted for 24%. And this is during 2008 to 2024. Now, if we divide this entire period into 3 5-year periods, say period 1, period 2, and period 3, with period 3 being the most recent one, then we find that in period 1, manufacturing was really the dominant, accounted for the dominant share, 39%. In period 2, it was finance and insurance, and that accounted for 37%. And in period 3, which is the most recent period, manufacturing accounted for 38%. Now, in period 1, manufacturing was really related to construction. For instance, there was cement, paints, and also manufacturing projects related to electricity generation. In period 2, it was largely finance and insurance, and there was only one company which accounted for a major chunk, and that was State Bank of India. In period 3, we again see manufacturing accounted for the largest share, but this time round, it is the processed food sector which accounted for the largest share. And we see the presence of firms like Britannia, Parle, Varun Beverages, and Haldiram. There are other agro products also in which India could collaborate. One of them is the herbal sector. Nepal has a wide range of medicinal plants, and these are being exported informally. So there is a large scope of harnessing this and processing it within Nepal. Another sector, manufacturing sector, where there is potential is the pharma sector. And currently, India imports pharmaceuticals from the members of the Pharmaceutical Inspection Convention and Pharmaceutical Inspection Cooperation Scheme members, which are called the PICS members. And it's mostly the developed countries which are members of this convention. So Nepal is actually importing pharmaceuticals at a very huge cost. And with India, what's happening is that it's the Nepalese Drug Authority which is coming to India, conducting inspections, and this so that these firms can export to India. But this is a very expensive process for Nepal, and so if India were to invest in the pharmaceutical sector, that would reduce the costs of pharmaceutical imports for the entire nation. And currently, and it will also stop the informal exports that are happening in the pharma sector between India and Nepal. A large number of these medicines are actually going informally. Ready-made garments is another sector. We've forgotten about the ready-made garments sector because after the MFA agreement lapsed, the ready-made garment industry collapsed. So we should be thinking of reviving the ready-made garment sector in Nepal. There are still some other sectors which are emerging, and for instance, the IT sector is quite untapped. There are emerging areas related to the intelligent age, blockchain, robotics, and the others. And the push should be to get the leading Indian firms like TCS, Wipro, Infosys, Tech Mahindra, etc. Because just a few months ago, NVIDIA has invested heavily in these firms, and AI is going to be really very big in India. So that's another sector where FDI can be encouraged. Tourism again. I mean, tourism is an old sector, but the last year I think there was a record number of rise in tourism, and I think India is not really tapping into this, even though in the first phase India took a keen interest in tourism. Thereafter, its interest in tourism declined. Of course, I think what's happened in Nepal also is that the policy environment and the regulatory environment for FDI has improved substantially with the Foreign Investment and Technology Transfer Act, and then a follow-up regulation on that. So I think this has really strengthened the regulatory base in Nepal. But coming to, I think, the geopolitics of China and India, I think it's healthy competition for both countries, and there is enough room for everyone. And a little bit of competition is only going to help Nepal, and it would also help Indian investors and Chinese investors to come up with innovative models that could benefit Nepal. So other than that, I don't think there is I don't think either country should be worried about the other. And if that happens, then I think Nepal would be really in a sweet spot. It already is, and I think that it would be in a sweet spot. We can count that. I think I'd like to conclude here.
Thanks, Professor Nisha. I'm not an economist, really political scientist. So means I have a question which you can respond to after everyone is finished this presentation. How political are economic decisions, especially given the ups and downs between India and Nepal, the ties? So how political are economic decisions? But that you can answer after.
Sure.
So now I'd like to welcome Professor Guo. So so please go ahead.
Okay, I'm happy and very honored to attend this meeting. So I have a title for my presentation. The title is Geopolitical Competition over Dependence and FDI to Nepal. So first point I want to share my viewpoint is that the potential of Nepal. So we were told again and again that Nepal is a small country, but I think this is not true. Nepal is a small power, but it's not small country because population, Nepal is bigger, is larger than that of Australia. So by population, Nepal ranks number 49 globally. So at least population, Nepal is a middle-sized country. But why we have the perception that Nepal is a small country? I think the reason is quite obvious that Nepal located between two largest population countries around the world, China and India. So we have the misperception that the smallness of Nepal and the weakness of Nepal maybe could be bad for the growth or potentiality of Nepal. I think another thing we have to figure out is that the resources, particularly the water resources or hydropower in Nepal, is very large. By the report from Asia Development Bank, Nepal has the potential to harness over 72,000 MW hydropower across 10 major river basins and the sub-basins. And only 5% of Nepal's economic hydropower potential of the hydropower has been harnessed so far. That means if Nepal can make full use of its hydropower, it could be a developed country, or at least it could be a developing country. But now Nepal is a less developed country. I think one of the reasons is Nepal so far haven't made full use of its water resources. So in the world, Nepal is a middle-sized country with huge potentiality. Theoretically, Nepal can develop as well as Australia. So that's my viewpoint. The second one is that Belt and Road electricity face Nepal very well. Nepal population is not small, and its resources is quite good. Particularly its water resources is quite good. But the bad news is that the infrastructure in Nepal, including its capital city, Kathmandu, is quite poor. Compared to China, its infrastructure is quite poor. I think some speakers online have been to China, and you feel the high-speed railway in China is goes very fast and it's very comfortable. I think if one day the infrastructure in Nepal will be as good as China, I think it's even better for the growth, economic growth for Nepal. So during the past 10 years, the relationship between China and Nepal become closer and closer, particularly in economic area. Just as the Professor Lasher mentioned just now, China become the second largest investment in Nepal. And during the past several years, China is the biggest FDI commitment to Nepal, and China is the second largest sources of tourists from Nepal. And in the year of 20 2017, Nepal and China signed an MOU of BRI. So I think this is all belong to investment from China to Nepal. The bad news that Professor Nasher mentioned just now, geopolitical competition between China and India during the last 10 years become very fierce. Yeah, it's for us to understand why that happened. And India to China as the biggest threat from India taking China as the biggest threat to its national security, to its regional hegemony, for its border dispute. India, for so many years, takes South Asia as its backyard, very cautious on the other major powers' contact, particularly economic contact and security contact with South Asian countries. And unfortunately, during the last 10 years, Nepal and China's economic relationship become close and closer. So India, from his own interest perspective, take it as a bad thing, although it's good for Nepal. So Nepal over dependence from all aspects on India. Nepal's all fossil fuels are imported from India. And India is the biggest foreign trade partner of Nepal. It takes some foreign trade as much as 65% or even higher than that. And each year, around 8 million Nepalis working in India. And India, the Nepal, if Nepal wants to foreign trade with other countries, it has to transit through India. So all the things mentioned above shows that Nepal is over dependent on India. So when Indians take Nepal's some action violate India's national interest, India will punish Nepal by the Nepal's overdependence on India. So in the year of 2015, Nepal suffered a very severe blockade from India. And the BBC wrote an article, and the title of that article is Nepal Blockade, 6 Ways It Affects the Country. So these things prove that over-dependence equal to vulnerability. The Nepal's over-dependence on India equals huge vulnerability of Nepal to India. So during the last 5 or 10 years, under the background of fierce competition between China and India within South Asia or within Indian Ocean. India directly or indirectly punished Nepal every now and then by the overdependence of Nepal on India. The Kathmandu Post 3 days ago published a paper. The title of it is Exports Hit as India wants no Chinese components in Nepali goods. And some media have the similar papers. So I think Nepal's biggest challenge from the perspective of attract foreign direct investment is how to less dependent on India. But it's easy to see than to be done. Just as Professor Nashud mentioned, India and China are the two largest FDI to Nepal. But for the historical reasons, Nepal over-dependent on India, and it cannot be changed rapidly or in the foreseeable future. The situation could be the same. So, how could Nepal substantially attract more FDI from China? I think it could be the biggest challenge to Nepal in the foreseeable future. I mean, in the next 5 or 10 years. I think China has the motivation to give more FDI to Nepal, but the reality is that India doesn't want to see it happen. Okay, thanks. That's my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Leong. I have a question which you can answer at the end of this presentation, that how much Beijing is worried about not working of BRI, and what's its concern on MCC? What's its position on MCC, which Nepal signed with in 2017? You can answer after.
MCC.
You can answer after all panelists finish.
Okay.
So
Okay.
now, Dr. Push, please.
Thank you, Amit. I think much has been said in the earlier two presentations in terms of foreign investment into Nepal from its neighboring countries. What we see actually is, of course, we all know the importance of foreign investment, and particularly in a country like Nepal, which doesn't have enough of its resources. And foreign investment is not only about resources. Even if a country has enough resources, financial resources, for investment, the importance of foreign investment, I think, lies in the fact that it also brings in technologies, know-how, and so as to build up the country's own base. So it's been more than 3 decades that Nepal actually has opened up, and therefore it has gone into liberal trade policies, similarly opening up its economy for investment. But the sad part is that despite being, more than 3 decades of opening up, even today, the stock of FDI, particularly in Nepal, until the last fiscal year 2023, was only around 5% of its GDP. That speaks of the failure, in some sense, of Nepal in terms of attracting enough FDI. But whatever FDI that Nepal has got into, as Anisha also rightly said, that India has been the largest investor in Nepal so far in value terms. Almost like 1/3 of the FDI into Nepal has been from India. Second is, of course, China. Therefore, the two large neighboring countries are very important for Nepal from every aspect, but also from the aspect of foreign investment. The sad part is that Nepal does receive lots of commitments for FDI. If you look at the industrial statistics that the Department of Industry produces, the gap between the committed FDI, the pledged FDI, and the actual amount that is realized is extremely high. There's a very big gap. Same thing with the investment summits that Nepal has been, regularly organizing in the past few years in terms of showcasing projects, in terms of attracting more FDI, particularly in mega projects. The same has been the case. We see the Nepal sees a lot of places coming in, lots of commitments coming in for FDI, but actual realization has been extremely low. Nepal has not been able to realize much. Number of factors are there. Of course, many of them are domestic factors, obviously. The policy instability, the political instability that the country has been going through is one major reason that Nepal has not seen FDI. There are also other issues like the usual ones, like the lack of infrastructure. Lately, the land prices in Nepal has gone so high that it has become, I think, very difficult for investors to come and set up projects in Nepal. The issues with land acquisitions, issues with labor productivity. Although comparing the wages, labor wages, we find that the wage might be relatively cheaper in Nepal. But if you look at from the perspective of labor productivity, I think that is an issue that foreign investors often raise as an issue why not much foreign investment is coming in. So there are a host of issues on why many of these investments are not coming in. And what Nepal has also been seeing was that many of the investments, if you look at the number in terms of number of establishments, there are way many foreign establishments in Nepal compared to the value of investment that has come to the country. Now that is also is an issue for a country like Nepal, particularly in terms of the administrative management and the other kinds of problems that it would create. So what the country actually looks for are big ticket kind of investments rather than the very small kinds. Therefore, when the Foreign Investment Act was revised, Nepal put a limit in terms of the minimum amount of foreign investment that will be accepted. But the problem is, in today's world, say, for example, information technology. In the area of information technology, it is particularly the technology that comes in as foreign investment rather than the sum of money. You wouldn't need a big amount of money to bring in for information technology kind of projects, right? It's the know-how, it's the technology. So when you put a limit on foreign investment of the minimum that you can bring in, then you are practically obstructing the kind of IT-related project that would come in. So that being the issue, again, that limit was revised further to bring it down. So Nepal actually suffers from these different kinds of issues with foreign investment. But the bigger ones, as of late, as we are seeing, not as of late, actually, it has been there for like years, but now we are seeing it more lately, has been the geopolitics, the political economic kind of issues that we are seeing in terms of big kinds of projects, particularly like energy projects, hydropower, even solar. We all know, as Nisha also said, India, China, again, have been the biggest foreign investors in the hydropower sector in Nepal. But what we have seen lately is because of the kind of competition between the two large neighbors that Nepal has, there have been issues in terms of investment in hydropower projects. Some of the projects which had been actually awarded to some Chinese firms had to be withdrawn. Nepal withdrew some of those projects, right? Some of the projects which are quite sensitive in nature, say for example, Nisha talked about Arun 3, along the Arun River, there are 3 actually projects that India has developed. And now there is this whole idea of the upper Arun being developed. And it makes sense actually for the Indian firms which are already in the same river developing these projects to go for upper Arun as well, because the power evacuation, all that becomes easy. But the fact is that the upper Arun lies close to China. I think it's around 15 kilometers from China's border. And so there is this sensitivity from China in terms of India going into investing in the upper Arun. That is why I think Nepal had this idea from the very beginning that it will develop the upper Arun by itself, seeking funds from these MDBs, from particularly the World Bank and the Asian Development Bank. But as the reports say, that this has been run into problems because I think India still is interested to develop this project, whereas China is sensitive about India coming into this particular hydropower project. And this is not new, actually. There have been similar cases of solar power projects earlier. Through this Dolma Impact Fund, European funding, a project was to be developed in the Himalayan region close to China, which China opposed, and that had to be shelved. But later on, China again wanted to develop a solar project in Nepal close to the Indian border, and India again opposed that. So you see the kind of influence that the two large neighbors want to have in a small country like Nepal, small in a relative sense. I agree with Dr. Guo, whether Nepal is small or not, if you look at the population and compare it in terms of rank in the world. But because Nepal is between these two large neighbors, it is small. So the kind of influence that is there, the kind of strategic competition that is there, I think it is becoming a bit difficult for a country like Nepal to manage these kinds of geopolitical competition and bring in these kinds of much needed investment in those sectors in which it is supposed to have competitiveness, in which it is supposed to have that advantage, that is particularly hydropower. Otherwise, the manufacturing sector, Nisha said, of course, like Indian investment in the manufacturing sector has been there, and which is actually needed even more in Nepal, particularly if you look at from the perspective of generating more employment in the country. Like manufacturing is the most important one. And although there is some investment, but not much has come into the manufacturing sector. But there are areas where this investment in the manufacturing sector can come in. But again, when we look at investment in the manufacturing sector, we cannot look at it purely from an investment perspective. I think we also have to look at it from the trade relations with India, right? Because the largest market is India. So whatever investment comes into Nepal will come with the sight on the Indian market, particularly on the Indian market, given the geography, given the closeness, the infrastructure and everything, that the exports from Nepal can go easily to India. India will be a market that every foreign investor will be looking into. But there are problems also with trade. Of course, sometimes genuine, maybe other times not. Recently, there have been these media reports coming in that many of the cement that Nepal had started exporting to India have stopped their exports for the past few months, particularly because the Bureau of Indian Standards has not provided the certificates, despite these certificates being applied to the BIS for a very long time now. Similarly, is the case with the sanitary pads. That's a new, actually, industry, relatively new industry that has come in Nepal that have been set up to manufacture the sanitary pads. They're mostly used to go into the Indian market, but then again, because of the standards things, the certificates that have not been approved, these industries have not been able to export this production to India. So these kinds of issues where the trade obstructions also take place quite frequently, perhaps also are a barrier in terms of attracting foreign investment into Nepal. So what can Nepal do? Of course, it's a big question because the geopolitics of the time is so big that perhaps no one can answer at one go. But I think it is important for Nepal and as well as India and China to look at the sensitivities of all the three countries, not venture into those areas which are particularly politically very sensitive, Because if it is sensitive to the one, it is sensitive to the other as well. And that has to be understood by all the countries. Perhaps this is where the chair's earlier question would come in. How much of these economic decisions are political? I think it's mostly political, right? But perhaps we can see an areas where politics can be set aside and purely from economic perspectives, things can move forward if truly the two large neighbors would be willing to support a small neighbor in between in terms of the economics, in terms of propelling its economic growth, in terms of propelling its economic development. Otherwise, sometimes people tend to say that Nepal can benefit being between two large emerging markets, but then if things would go the way it is, if geopolitics should always be playing its part, then perhaps the question might be, is it a boon or a bane for a small country lying between two large emerging neighbors? I'll stop there. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, sir. My question is, does Nepal have a institutionalized economic policy on how to deal with India, China, and now even US? You can answer after Dr. Pramod finishes his presentation. Yeah, Dr. Pramod, please.
Thank you, Chair. At the outset, I would like to thank ISAS in general and Dr. Amit Ranjan in particular for setting up this joint webinar of ISAS and NICE on a very important topic of today, which is on the political economy of neighboring countries' investment in Nepal. We are also thankful to all the wonderful speakers, Dr. Puspa Sharma, Professor Nisa Taneza, and Dr. Go for their contribution. Before I start, let me briefly introduce NICE. Nepal Institute for International Cooperation is an independent, apolitical, and non-partisan think tank that works on international affairs, security issues, and issues of development. And we have a team of 8 scholars where we have 4 research centers: China Studies, Neighborhood Studies, Indo-Pacific Affairs, and non-traditional security issues. Coming back to the topic of today, I do not have much to add as distinguished speakers have already made their remarks and they have done extensive research on this topic. So my remarks might be very general observations. Let me start with the changing environment of FDI. We see improvement in investment environment in Nepal in recent times. And we started getting investment, foreign direct investment in Nepal after we got multi-party democracy in 1990, and then since then we had a Maoist insurgency for a decade long. We got a huge transition from monarchy to federal republic, and all in spite of having all those challenges, Nepal could see a stable economic growth at 2.6% per capita, and poverty of Nepal was reduced from 42% to 25% in a very short time. So all these were positive signals in spite of having political instability. The economy of Nepal was not in a very bad state. Nepal also adopted economic liberalization during mid-1980s, where most of the countries of Southeast Asia started. We started implementing the structural adjustment programs and fully liberalized economies started here. We all know that Nepal has political instability, but we also have poor infrastructure, high taxes on goods and services, and that has negatively affected foreign direct investment. We also have made key policies in order to attract FDI. For example, we had Foreign Investment and Technology Transfer Act in 1992 after we got democracy, and then new foreign investment policy in 2015 after we got the new constitution. So all these has brought us, there's some hopes here at the moment because we have Industrial Enterprise Act, Investment Board Act, and all they are working together in spite of several challenges. In terms of economic growth, we grew by 3.9% in last year, in spite of having COVID and all. Tourist arrival has increased by 30%. Hydropower is taking a leap. So all these give some hope to the investors here. We already discussed that India has agreed to purchase 10,000 megawatt of electricity. So that has also given kind of confidence to the investor in Nepal at the moment. As we discussed, like certain sectors are there, like hydropower, tourism, and few more sectors, like Professor Tanay was talking about Nvidia investing in India. We have TCS interested in establishing data center in Nepal. So I think since we have surplus of electricity at the moment in not the peak season, but on peak season we still have some problem, but on other time we have excess of electricity, and that has attracted those sectors that consume huge amount of electricity. Like TCS is one. Establishing data center can be one because they consume huge amount of electricity. So I think that is a new improvement here. And Nepal has also worked on number of issues like double taxation avoidance agreement. We have signed with 11 countries. We have BIPA, bilateral investment protection and promotion agreement, with 6 countries, and that has also made things easier. We have single door investment policies. So all these bureaucratic hassles are being worked out, but still not done fully, but it's in the progress. I think we have one of the easiest visa regime at the moment. We get people easily get business and non-tourist visas for foreign investors or researchers or their families. So that has also, there's also in positive light. In spite of all these, I mean, we have problems. Nepal's infrastructure remain insufficient for investment. We have limited roads. Electricity is now improving. Water, telecommunication, trade, logistics all have issues. Industrial development is very slow, with partial progress along the border with India, which we have seen, like there are some steps taken care on both sides. Again, there is heavy trade dependence on India, and that at times when there is restrictions, Nepal has to face challenges where we have seen in the past. Apart from that, obviously, labor laws, which Professor Pushpa was talking about, trade unions, politicizations, all has also affected the whole process. Geopolitical competition or tension, all the speakers talked about, is very important because we all know that we have one area which has huge potential, that is hydropower, and India is not very comfortable with increasing Chinese FDI in this sector, because India thinks that with huge investment in this sector can make China as the largest FDI provider in the country. That can raise lots of questions on the special relation that Nepal and India enjoys, because we know that 1,200 megawatt Budhiganj project, which is the highest in Nepal's history, one of the largest projects, got cancelled. And if that happened, I mean, that would have made China as the largest FDI provider in the country, and that would have impacted the relations of India and Nepal. So India is concerned about those kind of issues here. The previous speaker already talked about India as a displeasure when there is Chinese investment along on solar project near southern border, or vice versa when there is Indian investment along the Chinese border, that have faced challenges. We had similar challenges even in the past during Cold War, like when initially it was Chinese who proposed to construct Birganj-Pattaya Road, which is near the Indian border, and then Nepal government had to cancel that, and then India made it free. It was similar on the Kohalpur-Banwasa Road, which is on the western Nepal. It was initially Nepal government constructing it. Nepal government had approached India. India said, we don't have fund. Then Nepal got funds from different banks, and then it was Chinese contractor. Then India asked Nepal to cancel that project to the Chinese, and then India constructed it for free. So those kind of geopolitical competition are visible at the moment. In recent times, with the emergence of US, with the new engagement of US, it has further complicated the situation, because initially it was China's BRI versus India's BIMSTEC, where both used to compete, but now there is new player, which is US, which will be further complicating the issues. There are some hopes, because there is a strong demand for investment. There is a strong desire for infrastructure project, and the public sector also coming into this center. So there's lots of changes at the moment. Initially, like most of the hydropower project were not progressing well. But with the emergence of public investors, I think things are changing. They are putting intense pressure on not only the government, but even on the neighbors. We can see Nepal, India, Bangladesh transmission line and all. I mean, these things are coming up, which are opening new avenues for cooperation. So I think things are changing. Obviously, there is corruption, there is transparency issues, there is political instability, which has to be dealt internally. There are external challenges, geopolitical tensions. In spite of that, what we have seen is that there are some policies change that new. We have some like investment board and different institutions are coming at the moment, which are making some progress. So I think at least we are moving in a good direction. So I think uh, overall, I think we are moving in the right direction. It will take some time because still the number of issues that we talk are still not fully resolved. We still have geopolitical tension. We still have the institutions are still not very. They're still in the process of making, so they're not very competent. The investment environment is still fragile. Professor Puspa was talking about the price rise of land and all. That are very remarkable challenge at the moment. But what we have also seen is that at the moment, with a kind of new crisis with the banks, cooperatives, and all that has gone down. So at the moment, with all these economic issues that we are facing at the moment, there is some stability. I think economists predict that the land price might not increase rapidly like in the past for next 5 years. So I think that also are contributing in that direction that maybe a day are coming where we can have a better environment for investment, not only from India and China, but also from other countries. I'll give one example. In last few years, after COVID, there are almost 12 brand hotels from US that has come into Nepal. We didn't have Marriott, we didn't have Aloft, Holiday Inn is there, Hilton, and many new American hotels are coming into this sector. So initially it was only Chinese and Indian. Now there is new investment coming from the West or American. So I think these are a favorable environment for Nepal at the moment, which I think we should not negate. Thank you. I'd like to end it.
Thanks, Pramod. My question is, with this rise of transactionalism in foreign policy, how Nepal is faring and how it's looking at this transactionalism in foreign policy, how it is dealing with its neighbor using transactionalism. Yeah, before I open the floor for and take questions from the audience, and may I ask Dr. Nisha to respond to questions which I asked?
It was really a pleasure listening to everyone.
Yeah.
And it was very, very interesting hearing all the speakers. I truly haven't witnessed this kind of a rich discussion on FDI before. So thank you, ISAS and NICE, for this panel discussion. And because I was focusing more on the economic side of it, I always shy away from the politics of it. But it is so real and it is staring us straight in the face. So we have no choice but to face it and to deal with it. And I can understand Nepal's situation where they're having to deal with the politics of these two large nations. But the fact that Nepal actually came up with this solution of involving the MDBs in the sensitive areas, I think that's a masterstroke on Nepal's part. I'm not too sure about why that hasn't worked, but in terms of the country's thinking, it is really, really good because you're ironing out the sensitivities. And you're very right, Pushpa, that the sensitivities are there for all three countries. It's not for one or the other. It's for all three. And so there is tension amongst all three when it comes to something that is sensitive. But also the fact that that not all sectors are equally sensitive. So one would place hydropower on top, right on top, when it comes to sensitivities. And then if you go down, whether it's manufacturing or services, it becomes less and less so. So I also think that maybe, again, I'm speaking from Nepal's perspective, that why should it be only India and China? You don't need land borders for FDI. So, there was a time when I would say in the 90s, when Nepal was actually getting FDI from a whole lot of developed countries. So, and then during the Maoist thing, for those 10 years, there was actually an outflow of FDI. So there was a net outflow of FDI because all these, it was mostly the developed countries which actually withdrew from Nepal. But India stayed, and India stayed only because, I think, because of the cultural ties, they knew how to navigate through different regimes. And that's the reason why they had a longer staying power in Nepal. And that is perhaps why we are still there and still the largest. But on trade, you're very right. NTBs are a major issue. Here again, I would say that FDI is for increasing production. And if production is increasing and the domestic market is not enough, then why only India? Nepal could be looking at a diversified base for exports. The fact remains that FDI contributes a lot more to the economy than trade does. So because it's deeply embedded and because of the other benefits that it brings to the economy. So I think that's very important. So I would again say that it's time, and because Nepal is actually strengthening its regulatory regime on FDI, this again is a very strong base to attract FDI from other countries as well, not just India and China. So I think if there are more countries, the sensitive areas will also reduce and the friction will also reduce. As long as there is only India and China, I think there is more room for them to, to just needle each other. And of course, the country that gets needled the most is Nepal in the process. Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, thanks for your answer, ma'am. Dr. Gio?
Me? Okay. Okay, I will give a brief response to Mr. Chairman's question. Okay. The MCC is very obvious. It points to China. If we look back, the timing of MCC stand, they just followed the BRI, MOU of BRI signed between Nepal and China. 2 months later, the MCC signed. So it's very obvious it points to China. So China definitely is very cautious about the procedure of MCC in Nepal. So I think the motivation behind US of MCC is to contain the BRI in Nepal. At least it could be kind of competitor of BRI in Nepal. So the second, I think, even more sensitive or more important to China is the Xinjiang issue. Okay, or we can say the Tibet issue. Okay, by the way, I have to say that officially in China, they do not use Tibet anymore officially in China. It has to use Xinjiang. So there are about 20 or 30,000 Tibetans in Nepal. So China concerned the MCC would be connected to the Tibetans in Nepal. So for the 2 reasons I mentioned it about, China is very cautious about the MCC in Nepal. If it's just an economic issue, China would not be that cautious. But it could be a kind of a political issue. So even to the core interest of China. So it has to pay more attention on the MCC. So that's my personal answer to the question. Thank you.
Yeah, Dr. Push.
Thank you. I think your question was on whether there is institutionalized economic policy regarding the two countries, right? Well, I mean, we can look at this question from different perspectives about what we actually mean by institutionalized economic policy. If you look at the economic relations with India, we have these bilateral trade and transit agreement for a very long time. We have the bilateral investment protection and promotion agreement. So these agreements are in place. So we can say that this has been institutionalized. Trade and investment between the two countries has been institutionalized in one sense. But how does Nepal deal with India overall in terms of economic policy? Then that would be a very open question based on interpretation of different people. Because what we see is that, as I had said earlier, it is politics actually that trumps economics everywhere, and as is the case here as well. So oftentimes what we see is that who is in the government, who is in power, and to which country or a political party it is near to, or its ideology is nearer to, uh, perhaps makes some difference. And that has been the perception of like many, which might not be the case entirely, but partly that could be true. And this we see more in the case of Nepal because of the different kinds of political parties exercising power in turns. And historically, because of the relationships of these political parties with the two neighboring countries, the perception still exists. How much of that is true, whether that has changed over time, is a different question, right? But what we see is because of the way that the different party in power tends to deal quite differently with the countries, perhaps is an answer to your question to say that Nepal might not have an institutionalized economic policy as such. If Nepal were to have one, then perhaps that would be the first step to go forward, which would mean that if there would be, say, common foreign policy, a common like economic policy in terms of dealing with the neighbors, whoever it is, it doesn't only have to be India, China, but even the rest of the countries in terms of how Nepal deals with, the other countries in terms of its economic relations, then there would be stability, there would be predictability, and that will perhaps give some way forward. But that has not been seen historically. That's why the perception that, the kind of dealings that the different political parties do based on their interests, based on their ideologies, is, I think, a reason why Nepal at times does not see the kind of positive relationships that people aspire that it should have with its neighbors. And to come to some of the comments that Nisha made, I totally agree. I mean, like, why does it only have to be the two neighbors? FDI, I mean, like, it can be from any country. But perhaps the India and China are the two large emerging neighbors, and which I think know Nepal better. Nepal knows them better. There are cultural and similar other ties as well. Perhaps that might be one reason. And historically also have been ways which have been in Nepal for a long time. And one of the reasons that Nepal had always pushed for attracting FDI was the benefits that it was having as an LDC and the preferential market access that it could have into other countries. Nepal was not able to capitalize on that so much. And now that has gone actually, because 2026, Nepal is going to graduate from the LDC category. So the kind of preferential market access that it would have into other countries, I think is not going to be there. So what it could not capitalize earlier, I think it's difficult from that perspective, particularly, especially into manufacturing, to capitalize. And in terms of the Indian market, in terms of some of the products like cement, bulky items, which I think it's difficult to export them to far away. Even in India, actually, it's the bordering states with Nepal that Nepal is actually eyeing and then exporting these items into. Like Nepal perhaps doesn't have the competitiveness to export these bulky items to far away, like places even in India. So it depends on the kind of product that it is exporting and the competitiveness that it can have in terms of why India will still be a preferred market for Nepal, whether it's its own investment or foreign investment. Um, uh, and in terms of the comment that Dr. Guo made in terms of MCC and BRI, that is exactly the issue. You see, when these kinds of things come into play, that makes the situation in a country like Nepal a bit, troublesome. Uh, it's not only the two countries actually, even again, within the political parties, within people from within the political parties again, it's not that the one political party has one thought. Even there are groups within the political parties which take up this issue in a very different way. When MCC was accepted, there was a huge uproar in terms of whether to go for it or not. Whereas initially it was Nepal which had actually, I wouldn't say apply, but which had Nepal had shown an interest to be a part of the MCC. And it was all transparent. Every documents have been there. It's a grant, and there are conditions in terms of how it can go forward, in which sectors it can go forward. So far, I think, there is nothing to do with the other areas other than building up infrastructure, that is transmission lines and the upgradation of existing roads. So as long as it is a grant and Nepal can capitalize on that, it's good for Nepal. So Nepal could take it up, right? But it was quite concerning that even I think some of the Chinese diplomats spoke very, against the MCC openly and publicly, which was which used not to be the case earlier. But then we could see that why, because of all these geopolitics going on in the country. With BRI, again, Nepal is open to it, but the whole debate that's going on now is BRI for what? Under what condition? MCC was a grant. If BRI would have to be taken, the grant, funding under BRI has to be taken as a commercial loan. Is Nepal ready for it? Can Nepal go for it? I think that is the biggest issue at the moment. Why the implementation plan has not been finalized and the projects under BRI has not gone forward even after 7 years after signing up the MOU, right? So rather than playing out in terms of playing out geopolitics on each and every aspect, as Nisha rightly said, there are areas which are very sensitive, there are areas which are not. Perhaps it's in the interest of all the three countries to sort this out and then look at the sensitivities, look at the non-sensitive areas, and start very good cooperation in non-sensitive areas, keeping the sensitive areas at bay or having a good negotiation on that. Perhaps that is the way forward for a small country like Nepal to benefit from these two emerging neighbors. Otherwise, yeah, things look bleak. Thank you.
Just 1 minute. Audience are requested to please send us your questions by tapping on chat box or where there's a question mark. So you are requested to please send your questions. Yeah, Pramod, please go ahead.
Thank you. On rise of transactionism in foreign policy and how Nepal is dealing with it, I think Nepal need investment, Nepal need infrastructure, and Nepal need connectivity. And that's why Nepal is now part of BRI. Nepal is also part of MCC, and Nepal is also partnering in BIMSTEC. So Nepal has made it very clear that we need investment, we need infrastructure, and with connectivity because there is strong demand for all this. But while dealing with any of these, like when we get investment, when we get infrastructure or connectivity, I think we have to deal with the core issue of a neighbor, like sensitivity of on the core issue, like security must be addressed. Like when we are engaging on BRI, we should take care of India's concern, or when we are doing with any project with India, if it hurts China, I think we have to be sensitive on that. So I think that is very important, addressing the sensitivity of our neighbors is very important when we engage with any of our neighbors. For that, I think political parties should form consensus, which is a challenging task because, as Dr. Pushpa said, like within the party, there are different voices on a single issue within the same party. So getting three different major parties together on a single issue is a Herculean task. So that is a major challenge that I think we have to deal with. Second is that, like, I mean, there are questions sometimes that, oh, there is Nepal sensitivity, like engaging with China, basically. I think when Nepal engages with China, Nepal should look at the global example, like which are the countries that China engage globally. It's the US, the largest trade is with the US. Then it comes other countries like Japan, Australia, India, Europe, and there are also the adversaries. So when China can engage with its adversaries, or China's adversaries can engage with China on economic issues, I think there is no harm in Nepal engaging with China on economic front. So I think on this economic front, when there is investment, when there is infrastructure, when there is connectivity, when we can do something for clean energy, where we can fight poverty, I think on these issues we should be very clear and we can engage. I think there is no harm in getting BRI. There is no harm in engaging MCC. There is no harm in getting BIMSTEC project. There is only one thing that neighbors we should be aware of, and the neighbors can raise their concern, is on their sensitivity. If it hurts the core issues which security Nepal must address in order to have healthy relations and even like avoid geopolitical tension. But apart from that, I think Nepal should be very clear. It should be able to explain to its neighbors that it will not hurt this. I think that is how we can go forward on that, and that is how Nepal should deal on these kind of issues. We should look at India, like in spite of having the border standoff, in spite of having a number of soldiers killed, the trade between two countries expanded. Even at the moment, there are news that that one of the factors that brought India and China together to sit on the table and resolve the differences was economic factor. So I think these are very important. I think economics should lead our foreign policy like it has been doing in other countries. And I think once we are able to get confidence of a neighbor by addressing their sensitive issues, I don't think we'll have any challenges dealing with any of these initiatives that we have signed with any of our neighbors. Thank you.
Yeah, one more question to you, Dr. Pushpa and Dr. Pramod. You both of you can also answer it. That how concerning is the impact of climate change due to ongoing economic activities in Nepal? We have seen across the world the economic activities and then development growth affects very badly in many cases to the environment and trigger climate change. So how concerning is it for Nepal?
Well, I mean, if I may take that, I think Nepal, being a very disaster-prone country, Himalayan country, the impact of climate change are already being seen. Actually, all throughout the world, we are seeing temperature rising and then these unusual floods and different kinds of disasters taking place. Nepal is no exception. Only recently, we saw very unusual floods in the country, landslides, which have impacted many of the hydropower projects also. And because many of these projects are in the Himalayas, in the hilly areas, because of these kinds of natural disasters, climate-induced disasters, they're having an impact. So on the one side, they are impacting these projects on a large scale, but the impact that they are having on the lives and livelihoods of people is immense. I think at COP29, Nepal's president had made his initial, I think, speech yesterday, where he said that, when we talk about climate change, we have to think of the Himalayas first. If the Himalayas are gone, I think the whole world is in a problem. So that's how I think that speaks of the kind of impact that Nepal is facing from climate change. Although I think this doesn't fit very well into the topic that we're discussing, but to your question, of course, like Nepal in terms of climate change is one of the most affected countries, and that's one of the most important area of concern for Nepal at the moment, I would say.
Yeah.
Yeah, just to add, I mean, there's not much to add, but like what is happening at the moment is that people are talking more about a drowning island, rise of sea level. But what is the source of rise of sea level? Why the island are drowning? It's melting of our glaciers and our snow mountains. So I think people are not giving much attention to the source. They're talking more on the impact. So I think that is where one should talk about how can you stop melting of glaciers, melting of snow, which is less talk compared to the downside effect, because that is immediate. The islands are drowning, and people have to react. So there is more resources, more attention, and more talk on those issues. I think that is one we really have to talk about. In Nepal, we can't see the mountain we used to see 20 years ago. We don't have enough snow. The glaciers are bursting. I don't know when it was when Baburam Bhattarai was the prime minister. We faced that, and it has impact severely. It has impact poverty elevation program. It has impact hydropower projects. The future of hydropower projects are on risk at the moment. It has gender implications. It has all kind of implications which is not talked about at the moment. I think that is one area. Again, getting neighbors, I think at least when you talk about hydropower, something like clean energy, I think India, China, and other powers, maybe Japan, all should come together and harness Nepal's hydropower potential so that it can be a source of energy, clean energy to South Asia. Like we all know that India is a huge market. India is in need of clean energy. Bangladesh is another market next door, and it's not difficult to export to Bangladesh. Bangladesh has been demanding clean energy from Nepal because they are a large polluter, and they are spending that energy into garment, which European are the consumers. So European are also putting immense pressure. In fact, Europe is also interested to support this kind of clean energy programs. So I think this is one sector where the geopolitical tensions should not have touched. I mean, we understand India's sensitivity. We know the implications of geopolitical competition, and that is all good. But at the same time, when it comes to clean energy, something like this, I think there should be cooperation. Maybe India, China, and Japan should come to Nepal, harness Nepal's hydropower sector, create transmission line. MCC are also most welcome to create transmission, and they should come together to build that infrastructure at the moment. I think that is what we really expect at the moment in Nepal. Thank you.
Yeah, ma'am, you want to say something?
Really, except that I completely agree that the link to climate change with hydropower is so strong, and the fact that this natural resource is unlimited, and and the two large nations can really, they both have set targets for mitigation and for net zero. And I think the sooner we harness, we're not seeing the benefits, and the sooner we resolve these issues, the faster we can actually, kind of build this into our economic systems, build the hydropower, clean energy into our economic systems. So the opportunity cost of politics is just way too high, way too high. And cooperation is really the only solution.
Yeah, there's a linked question. How can India and China collaborate on addressing climate change in Nepal? So anyone can answer, but be brief, please be brief. How can India and China collaborate on addressing climate change in Nepal?
That for me?
It's a question.
Hello.
Anyone can answer.
Oh, okay. I would again say it's best if they do, but if they can't, then I think I like Nepal's strategy personally, that you get a neutral partner to deal with the sensitivities. And if it is not sensitive, then the two countries can come together. And the two countries, there are meeting grounds. It's not like India and China don't have meeting grounds. Even between India and China, it was just mentioned, China is our largest trading partner, and we have a huge trade deficit. And even though India has not been inviting foreign investment from China, today we have changed our stance on Chinese investment into India. So that this is a sign of cooperation. And, again, FDI is a far more, powerful vehicle for economic growth than trade is. So India is also changing towards wanting more FDI from China into India.
Yeah, if I may quickly add,
Then, Dr. Yeah.
I think addressing climate change is a big issue itself, right? It's not that a few countries can do work on that. But the thing is, India and China being very large countries, their emissions are also, or not in per capita term, but in terms of total emissions, it's also very large. So as Nisha rightly said, one way that these countries can help Nepal in terms of climate change, not only Nepal actually, help themselves also is as soon as possible harness the clean energy that is there through cooperation and then use this clean energy at least to cut off some of the emissions. That would be one way of, I think, helping all of them together.
Yeah, there's a question on saying that does Nepal prioritize investments from a particular country? If so, I would like to know what are the differences in Nepal's need for investment from China and India. Yeah, Dr. Gyu, want to start? It's a I repeat it. Does Nepal prioritize investments from a particular country? If so, I would like to know what are the differences in Nepal's need for investment from China and India. Please be brief.
I answer the question.
Okay.
If I may answer it very quickly, I think Nepal doesn't prioritize investment from any particular country. Nepal is open to investment from any source, whether it's India, China, US, Europe, anywhere. But the main thing is, it only wants perhaps the sensitivities to be, taken care of, and investments come into those sectors in which it has, of course, a competitive advantage. Otherwise, I don't think it has any priority for investment attraction from any particular country.
Then there's a question, how can Nepal successfully navigate the geopolitical tensions between its two neighbors while dealing with FDI flow? Dr. Pramod would like to answer.
How can Nepal successfully navigate geopolitical tension? As I said earlier, I think Nepal should be ready to welcome any kind of investment, any kind of connectivity project, any kind of infrastructure project into Nepal, because that is the need for Nepal. While addressing that, Nepal should take care of the sensitivities of the neighbors. It should not engage in any project that can hurt India's core interest in Nepal, which is security. At the same time, anything that can hurt China's core interest, which is also security. At the same time, any of neighbors, I mean, if we engage on any issues, if it can hurt the relationship of Nepal with any of the countries, we should avoid that. I think if we're able to do that, then we are able to succeed. And to get that, sometimes we can have intense pressure from the neighbors, but I think for that, we need to have political consensus among political parties. We should have that kind of dialogue so that we can talk to the neighbors, put our things on the table, and then negotiate with them. I mean, if it does not hurt their core interest, we should be able to engage on those issues, because that is what, as I said, other neighbors are doing. In spite of having problem on the border for India, India has been engaging with China economically. In spite of having differences of China with US, US with China, China, Japan, they're engaging economically. So I think in spite of having adversarial relations, if they're engaging with China, why can't we engage with China on economic front? Obviously, we are two different countries. We have different political system. We have no problem with Chinese having any kind of system. Chinese have no problem what kind of system we have. But when it comes to economy, it's all about the economic theory, where we say, whichever offer the best, we engage. So I think that should be the principle when we're engaging on economic connectivity and all. FDI is economic aspect, and economic theories should guide that. You should not bring too much security or other perspective. But again, when there is sensitivities, that has to be addressed, because we have open border with India, we border with China, the sensitive part, that has to be addressed. And they are big powers. If we do not do that, then Nepal will have to pay the price for that. So I think apart from that, there's nothing much for Nepal to worry. But again, another factor is internally that our parties are fragmented. So we have to get that consensus so that we can implement whatever we endorse. Thank you.
Thanks, Pramod. We don't have any more questions, and I think we have also finished on time. So then I would like to thank the participants and the audience and for this stimulating talk on Nepal's political economy, and we hope that you will again join us for other interesting talks which ISAS. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, ma'am.